Welcome to the Accounting Technology Lab, sponsored by CPA Practice Advisor, with your hosts, Randy Johnston and Brian Tankersley.
Welcome to the Accounting Technology Lab. I'm Randy Johnston with my friend Brian Tankersley, co-presenter of the Accounting Technology Lab. We have a series of sessions on CES 2025. We'd like to, in this session, give you an overview of what happened, mainly related to business technology that we think you can use. Now, Brian and I have been fortunate to attend CES for a number of years. I think this was Brian's 15th year. I've been going since the 1980s with Comdex and predecessor shows. So I've gone to CES for these types of electronic show for a long time. Now, he and I like to walk the show, and we did pretty much that again this year, walk the entire show. We also attended press events, including PepCom and Showstoppers, which were wonderfully insightful. We got to speak with a lot of CEOs, founders, product designers, and so forth. So, Brian and I do enjoy our time together. It gives us a chance to think about what's going on with the technology industry and kind of plan out things that were important. We also built a list of our podcasts for this year for you. So we have you in mind with a lot more to come. So, Brian, I know in this session we thought we'd focus around business technology. And I think if I look at the show, there's some things we could say about the show, but hands down, the most impressive display was done for the second year in a row by SK, I believe.
Yeah, SK's display was just absolutely over the top. It was an entire wall of LED panels, and it had it was set up to look like racks of servers that were doing AI. And so I've actually got a video that I'll play for you here. I gotta make sure it's muted. But anyway, you can kind of see for those of you listening on audio, I'm sorry, but it looks like something out of a sci-fi movie. It's got this central central pillar in the middle, and it has data going up, looking almost like the Matrix digital rain, except it's blue, and it has different characters going up, and then it's surrounded by a circle of digital screens that look like rack servers, and then the exhibit on a mezzanine, and then the exhibits are down below where all of the people are. It was a real sight to behold, and that's kind of amazing considering SK Hynix is what they make is RAM chips, and so that's not something that you're going to buy directly from them. You're just going to buy RAM chips, from one of the other brands, and so they're really selling to 50 buyers at big electronics companies, maybe 100 buyers, but they definitely had the best one for sure.
And it was amazing to me that it was almost like Star Wars, with the central column in it and so forth. It was really a stunning display to look at. But
yeah, if you're listening to this, you may want to jump on over to the YouTube channel and watch the video of it. I'll upload it as a separate video just so you can see it. I took about 30 seconds worth of video on it, and it's amazing.
But what really happened is the majors did private room displays by and large, except for, I believe, HP. And I believe that we have multiple worthwhile products for you to consider in the HP line. So among those,
now I have to say my general impression of CES this year was that it was very much like a science fair run by kids that don't do their homework. Okay, there really wasn't much new announced this year. And so in honor of that, I'm actually wearing today my Animal House college sweatshirt that says college across it, because it feels like, this was a Blutarsky, it was just a total Bluto CES. It was, there are some quite interesting things, but they were few and far between. I mean, just as an example, last year Randy and I took about 700 pictures, and that's the way we that's the way we capture data at CES. This year we took around 200. So it was significantly there were significantly fewer nuggets of joy, but we brought the ones we found to you. Okay.
And so here we go. The first one of those that we're going to talk about was a dual display that we found from a company called NST. It was rather interesting because it was clearly an add-on that you could just clip onto a laptop and it would turn your laptop into a 3-screen setup. Now, we did talk with the person that was there. The laptop itself, or the laptop screens, were about 12 inches, and I think they really need to be bigger to be more effective. But conceptually, I'd never seen anything like this one before.
And now I will say that it didn't feel like this one would have survived. It would have survived 1 year of audits, maybe 2, but not much further than that. It didn't feel like it would survive a year of a teenager, because it had a plastic frame surrounded. And if again, it was a nice device, but it wasn't. It just didn't feel like it was engineered to survive the electronics apocalypse that is daily driving in work.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and I really had a great conversation with the product manager of the HP laptop division. Now, HP is replacing all of their X family, their Dragonfly family, and so forth, all these executive lines with new AI powered laptops with superior cameras. In fact, I questioned it and asked twice, but the product manager said that they were using 9K cameras instead of 4K cameras built into the laptops, which was pretty fascinating. Also, the safety screen inside the product was quite well done, but the products were amazingly light. Other authors that wrote about these products mentioned their haptic mouse pads, which were interesting, but the colors were brilliant. The speeds were solid. Overall, a nice product line announced from HP. Now, one minor thing that I'll just mention on the privacy viewing screen, and that's a product that I have used in all of my HP laptops for, well, since it was available, so about 10 years or something like that. There's no doubt that this feature called SureView continues to get better and better. The current version of SureView has a feature for prying eyes. If they detect that somebody not straight at your screen is looking at it, it will narrow the screen. And so, in effect, only you sitting right in front of it can see it. So picture you're in a coffee shop or in an airplane and somebody's trying to peek and see your work. It just turns on the screen and narrows the view. It's really pretty nifty idea.
That's very slick. I can't tell you how many times I wish I'd had that in the past.
Yeah. Well, and I have pretty good vision, and I watch people work on airplanes, not protecting what I'd consider confidential work way too many times. Now, HP had another breakthrough in their workstation. They had a new mini workstation called the Z2 Mini G1A. It was a gorgeous workstation product, which could allocate 96 gig of memory to shared memory. So just like Mac 2 years ago introduced unified memory, this is a unified memory product. So it's only the second one I'm aware of besides the Apple designs that have unified memory. So then you can take a portion of the memory that you have. Let's just say you've got 128 gig of memory. You can throw 96 gig of it at shared AI processing. The laptop version of it was actually quite light, much lighter than my traditional laptops that I'd used before I went to the Ultrabook styles. So I was impressed with both versions of the new workstation, and I was impressed with the new docking station. HP has a docking station, which I use, but this is a new generation dock. all sorts of connectors on this. I think it's got like 6 or 8 connections for USB-C and A and network and all that. But it also senses the laptop that you're carrying via Bluetooth and checks the configuration before you plug in, or lets you just connect via Bluetooth. At least that's the way I understood it. And, the docking station here is a good one. Now, not very often do I recommend docking stations from the major vendors, but this dock has been useful. And, to me, that was another interesting oddity this year, Brian, is typically we see the vendors like Kensington and others that have had docking stations in their stands for the last few years. And if they were there, I just missed them this time around. I saw a few docking stations from a few vendors, but they were not very good, not very well designed. So, we're going to stick with our traditional recommendations of the Kensington docks and maybe this HP dock.
Yeah, the one thing I wonder is some of the, with some of the election uncertainty as well as some of the economic uncertainty in parts of the world, I wonder if the supply chain concerns aren't having people hold off on those releases. You and I discussed that that Samsung's actually having an event as we record this on the 10th, which is the last day of CES. Samsung is having a discrete event about 10 days from now, where they're going to release most of their new stuff. And so, maybe we're going to have, maybe they're waiting until the inauguration to see what happens. I don't know. There's a lot of things seems like that are causing these companies to not make big bets right now.
Yeah, and I know you and I went back and forth on this, and there's a half a dozen or more reasons, but nothing that we could say is factual. They would just be guesses. But HP did a nice job with their setup. The Omen lines that they also introduced, the gaming stations, were quite good advancements in their product lines as well. Well, IBM Lenovo, had a new ThinkBook called the Plus Gen 6 rollable laptop. Now, this feels a little gimmicky to me, but what it does is it lets you stretch the screen up into a 17-inch screen. So for those of you who are used to using multiple monitors that might have landscape and portrait, in other words, vertical and horizontal monitors, if you're used to having a vertical monitor, a 17-inch vertical monitor on a laptop is interesting. It is a use of the new flexible screen technology. And I think we'll see a lot more flexible screens as we go. Now, Lenovo also introduced several other products, but the one that was disruptive to most of our Dell buyer friends was Dell wholesale ditching all of their naming schemes. Now, this one got even a little weirder because basically the traditional Optiplex, Precision, Latitude, Inspiron, XPS, and Vostro names all went away. Now, Brian and I have recommended
best I can guess, they hired somebody from Microsoft that came up with the Office 365 nomenclature that is personal and business and services and software, and so you really don't know what it is.
Yeah, in fact, I would maybe go the other way with you. I think they hired somebody from Apple. Why? Because the new base names are Dell, Dell Pro, and Dell Pro Max. Well, if you've bought an Apple iPhone lately, that's kind of their naming conventions. But it got even weirder because they added 3 new names: Base, Plus, and Premium. And then to make it a little bit even more confusing, then they put the screen size name with it. So if you're buying a Dell product like the XPS nowadays, it's called Dell Premium. And then, of course, you'd have your screen size. So Dell Premium 13. But, kind of getting to the base point of what I wanted to say on this, we believe and still believe that there are 3 basic classes of laptops that are sold, or 3 desktop classes: consumer grade, business grade, and workstation grade. And you already heard me refer to the HP Z family, a workstation product. And for a lot of accounting firms and accountants, I've recommended workstations because they're solid, fast, powerful, and they just don't break. Well, as it turns out, I understand cost constraints, but I'm just not willing to not spend appropriate dollars to get the right grade of computer equipment. In other words, most consumer grade breaks too doggone easily. And nothing worse than having an auditor in the field who can't work, or somebody who's traveling on a business trips who can't work because of a failure. Well, in any case, I'm not trying to sound too critical of this, but one of the other major consultants of the profession was just beside himself, still trying to wrap his head around these new names and why. So anyway, we wanted you to be aware of that. But here's the net. Dell made no significant announcements, and they just threw out all the names. So what will happen is we'll have a run period in 2025 where new products will appear with these Dell Pro or Dell Pro Max names that are really replacements for the legacy XPS Latitudes and so on.
Yeah, it's interesting times to be sure. I will say that I built a new box, and this is the first set of podcasts we've recorded on it, and it's the new technology, this is the first desktop computer that I've had in my office as my primary daily driver, and it's a rocket ship. And I got to tell you that I think for many of our listeners. The desktop is probably the way to go if you're primarily office based. Now, obviously, if you do audit for a living, you probably need to have a laptop. But for most of you tax folks, remember we're not normal users of technology. Even though you think, well, I'm just adding a few numbers together. Well, your average tax preparer runs at least 10 applications at once. And so you really need a rocket ship computer to run all that stuff reliably. Furthermore, a lot of the code is bad old code, and it just doesn't run very efficiently. And so it's really incumbent, if you want to get the most out of your people, it's incumbent upon you to have the best quality machines that you can get, just because there's such a big difference in productivity. The videos that I'm rendering now, I used to, on my laptop, they used to render about 1 second of video for 1 second of rendering. Now it's about 6 seconds of video for each second of rendering. So it's significantly faster.
Yeah. And so, Brian, your explanation there is actually pretty important because most of our K2 team have converted to desktops. They'll use the laptops on the road, but it's just so much quicker and frankly, so much cheaper. So it's cheaper and faster and more reliable. So you tell me why you might not make that decision. The answer might be, I only want to have one computer. Okay, I get that. Now, ViewSonic has had secondary monitors for some time. We did see our friends from Australia with the espresso monitors again, with which won an innovation award. But ViewSonic made a strategic decision to change some of the materials used in manufacturing, allowing them to cut prices on all of their secondary monitors by about $100 a piece. So a secondary 17-inch monitor that a year ago was $299 is now $199. And the 15-inch monitors, which have been routinely $199, are now a little around $100, $99 to $129. I mean, it's clearly a good deal to buy. If you are watching this podcast, webcast, the monitor that says ViewSonic on it in the picture is a 27-inch wireless monitor. And both of the monitors were driven off of a single laptop wirelessly. So you're looking at both a wireless portable monitor and a wireless big monitor. And the performance was actually quite stunning. Got to talk to the product manager there. He explained why they were making the engineering changes they did and what was coming down. Also, ViewSonic uses LG and Samsung panels. So they are pretty high quality monitors to look at. Well, we also got to talk with our friend from Canada, Steve McGowan, who is the CEO of Matthias. And he explained that, one of Matthias's strategies had been to create keyboards and mice whenever a vendor discontinued their keyboards. So they introduced this year the equivalent of the Microsoft ergonomic keyboard, which has been discontinued. Theirs was even nicer because it had a really soft, chamois feeling wrist pad, and it supported the USB-C as well as A adapters. In the European Union right now, USB-C is the only types of products permitted. Whereas in the United States, we're still permitting A's, but also the keyboards that, Matthias had introduced before, which, just for the record, that's exactly what I'm running on today. If you're on that, you can actually see I've got Matthias keyboards in mine. Like them a lot. Now, also was pleased to have our friend from Rico, formerly known as Fujitsu, Scott Francis, in attendance. Rico brought a pretty large contingent of people, and they have introduced a ScanSnap receipt printer, which has all the same mechanisms of their high-end production quality scanners. They also still had their wireless and wired super light secondary monitors. Those are pretty expensive monitors, but they're quite good quality, and they are still the smallest, lightest products that we're aware of in the marketplace. Now, Rico also had another very nifty meeting camera, which we'll talk about in our meeting episode here about CES.
Well, it was an interesting trip to CES this year. We didn't have as many new things as we expected. I remember when you and I walked right into the central hall into the Sony booth. We were really, and then we went to the Nikon booth, and there were basically no cameras to speak of in the Nikon booth. We knew it was going to be a strange year. We saw some very interesting things from startups, and we'll talk about those in a future episode. But all in all, I think it was worthwhile. The two special events we went to, the PepCom Digital Experience and the Showstoppers at CES, I think were really the events that really paid the rent. And unfortunately, for those of you listening, you have to be accredited as press to get into those. And so, if you don't have a loving overlord like CPA Practice Advisor to get you in, you can't get in there. And so that's where we had the most productive things. But we walked over 31,000 steps this trip over 2 days, and it was a good use of time. And I think we're going to have a lot of not just there's a lot of the interesting things we saw, but I think we're going to have a lot of interesting announcements that are going to come out here in the first quarter that we'll keep you up to date on in the podcast.
Yeah, and I was pleased that my son-in-law, who formerly worked at Gray and now works for a farm implement creator, he and three of his colleagues went to CES, thought it was quite worthwhile because of the big John Deere tractors and Cat and other things that they dealt with. And I talked to him at the airport on the trip home, and he said, yeah, it was super worthwhile for them, and I'm sure it would be. Plus, it was coincidental, I think, that the ATSC 3.0 people that we talked to without prompting mentioned Gray. And Brian, you remember I turned to you and said, yeah, Dan worked for them. And Dan confirmed he had written the ATSC code for Gray. Well, we appreciate all of you listening in. And we'll talk to you again soon in another Technology Accounting Lab. If you want more information on CES, look for our other 2 podcasts on CES or my article on CES. So this is Randy and Brian signing off till another time. Good day.
Thank you for sharing your time with us. We'll be back next Saturday with a new episode of the Technology Lab from CPA Practice Advisor. Have a great week.